like people should be outraged. People should be marching in the street. How could this be happening? But we don't see that, right? Because it has been normalized.
Hi everyone. Before we start, I want to take a minute to talk about my next book. You may have heard about the story of GameStop in January or February and thought it was all over. You're sadly mistaken. Unfolding online has been a clash between the corrupt practices of Wall Street and the hive mind of the internet. It's a hot, raging information war pitting retail investors against financial giants swimming in corruption and fraud. The trailer is at the end of this podcast, but if you want to help crowdfund the book or just find out more, you can sign up to my mailing list to get access to a preview of chapter 1 or go to whenmoon.com to read more about the book. The first 200 people to pre-order the book will get a free pack of To the Moon crayons with their book. I just want to make a quick mention of our sponsors. Namecheap are one of the cheapest places on the internet to get a domain name for your next website. I've used Namecheap for all the sites I've ever purchased and have found it really easy to use. Spreaker are a rapidly growing platform for podcast recording, publishing, and monetization, with pricing plans as low as $7 per month. A cheap way to host your podcast and start earning from your back catalogue of shows. Finally, ExpressVPN is the internet's most trusted VPN. Protect your privacy and watch and view content that is location locked. You could even try watching Netflix from a different country. And right now, they're offering 35% off 12 months of ExpressVPN. Please use the links in the description below if you want to support the show. Anyway, here's the podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today, I am talking with Kirby Sommers, who is a former human trafficking survivor and author of numerous books on Jeffery Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, including her third edition of the brand new book, Ghislaine Maxwell, An Unauthorized Biography. Kirby, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
No problem.
Well, it's interesting because while everyone is talking about, let's say, the lawsuit that Virginia Giuffre has brought against Prince Andrew, and by everyone, I mean, finally, mainstream media has something to report. What I really always want to begin with is the layer of what Alexander Acosta said, which is, I was told to back off, that he, Epstein, belonged to intelligence. And so I hope it's okay with you, Josh, that I basically lay the foundation that we're not just talking about people involved in human trafficking, as horrible as that is, but we are talking about a deeply rooted problem, multi-generational intelligence operation.
Yeah, I'd say absolutely anything that you feel is necessary to
Okay.
lay out the story.
Okay, terrific. Well, as you know, I mean, we're at a milestone. Virginia on Monday, August the 9th, one day before the 2-year anniversary of Jeffrey Epstein's alleged suicide, filed a historic lawsuit against Prince Andrew of first-degree rape. She was able to do so because of there's this law in place for people who were children at the time that they were sexually assaulted, and that law was going to expire in another couple of days. And so, although her attorney, David Boies, had attempted for 5 years, Josh, 5 years, had attempted to get, I know nobody even talks about the length of time that her attorney has attempted to get him to respond to anything, to letters, to anything. And it's because she didn't want another lawsuit, right? I mean, how many lawsuits has she had? But so with the statute of limitations basically hovering over Virginia, she went ahead and sued him. And I think bravo, 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 because I don't know if you've noticed it, but I've noticed it, that it's in the news again.
Yeah. It's a topic that sort of is very easy to slide away that people can be like, oh, that's shocking, and then by the next day they've kind of like tucked it away in their mind, and the story disappears. So the sustained coverage has been really encouraging, actually, for getting to the truth here.
Right. Now, there seems to be some kind of, because I have a very large Twitter following, and I read all the comments as much as I can every single day. And I have noticed that people are saying things like, well, he'll be extradited, and stop. It's a civil lawsuit. It is not a criminal case, right? So what is going to happen is that he needs to be served with the lawsuit. And he was, in fact, and when I say he, David Boies, on behalf of Virginia Jeffery, did get permission to serve Prince Andrew. And so that means that once Prince Andrew was served, I would think within the next couple of days, he has, I believe, 21 days to respond. If he does not respond, which has been his fallback position for so many years, he basically, the lawsuit will go on without him because it's still a lawsuit. It's just no longer a request. And he will face the possibility of losing by default. So I think people don't understand that this is not criminal, that although it might, so for example, remember when Virginia sued Ghislaine Maxwell?
Yes.
That too was a civil lawsuit. However, before Ghislaine settled with Virginia in 2017, the lawsuit had commenced in 2015. During those 2 years, there was a period of discovery. So there were depositions, there were documents, and in fact, it's those very documents that are being requested from the court during the last 2 years. So that if Prince Andrew decides to go ahead with and fight Virginia, which makes no sense to me, frankly, there's going to be information that's going to be gleaned. Now, during the time that Ghislaine Maxwell was being deposed, for example, in that lawsuit, she lied. Well, today, part of the federal case against her includes two charges of perjury. So he's got to walk the line very carefully, because what happens even in a civil lawsuit could trigger, you understand, additional, if he lies, then that in the future might then trigger a federal case, because you don't lie. You're not supposed to, you're supposed to follow the law.
Yeah, under oath, it's you're opening a whole different set of crimes if you're lying in court or found to be. So you said there that you wanted to lay out the fact that this is not just like a single case, or not like just a story of human trafficking. This is a story about intelligence agencies and multiple people with a lot of power. So do you want to give like an overview of essentially that side of this entire story that maybe people aren't familiar with?
Well, I think that the people who are not familiar with it are perhaps people who are still getting their news on regular television, right? Where people getting their news, because all of us, we know what's going on. But even those who have followed this case, like by the time somebody finishes reading my book that I dropped last month, Ghislaine Maxwell, an unauthorized biography, they will understand that intelligence agencies use honey trap operations, but they will also understand that they are interconnected. So I have an example in that book, and I'm not going to name the person I use, but I use an example of a well-known model who stepped forward and outed another prince who, in fact, Jeffery Epstein knew, and who has not been made public necessarily, right? But it will have connected what appeared on the surface to be another trafficking ring in another country. So in that case, it was Paris, France.
Hmm.
And then I think, I mean, I think you're a guy from the UK, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you remember Jimmy Savile. And so
Yes.
like all of these, yeah, they're like spidery webs, right? They're interconnected to intelligence agencies. And I don't know if you remember or know that when Prince Charles, that would be Andrew's older brother, when Jimmy Savile became, I think it was either 70 or 80, one of his milestone birthdays, Prince Charles gave him a lovely gift with a very interesting note that I guess no one was meant to understand. And bottom line, and I don't remember it verbatim, but it said, "The world will never know how much you have helped us." Now, in your mind, as you hear me say that, doesn't that remind you
Whoa.
of what was said when Robert Maxwell was buried? That no
Yeah.
one will know, right?
Yeah, that is a really stunning wow, that is shocking. And I mean, this is the entire story is filled with shocking things. The whole way through, when I've been reading your book, is the words that just keep coming out of my mouth. I'm just sitting there flicking page after page, being like, "Holy shit!" Like that's those that was the overwhelming expression that came out of my mouth sitting reading the book.
Well,
It's
which part really jumped out at you, Josh?
Um, I guess there was quite a few. Well, I mean, it's the whole thing is particularly stunning. I mean, the thing that one of the ones that I'd kept a note actually that I wanted to mention here was when you mentioned that the FBI documents show there was concern about Robert Maxwell having access to the U.S. nuclear database. And just
Yes,
that specific fact, I remember like just springing out of me, and the, just the questions that roll through your mind is like, what is this guy doing with access to these things? Why is no one saying
right,
anything about this? Why is nothing being
right.
done about this? Like, what
Well, I'll
connections
answer
too
that
far that he
if
does he have that? Yeah, yeah, please do.
yeah. Well, Robert Maxwell had been under surveillance by the FBI and specifically J. Edgar Hoover, actually from the 1950s.
Mhm,
And I think that that's included in my book.
mhm,
However, J. Edgar Hoover was also blackmailed. He was gay at a time that it was not fashionable to be gay or acceptable at his time to be gay. But he had been blackmailed by the head of the CIA at the time, who hired, because the CIA partnered during World War II with the mob. And so they partnered with the mob, and there are two guys who went ahead and got some compromising photographs of J. Edgar Hoover, not just with his alleged lover, Clyde Tolson, who was his number two guy at the FBI, but he was also a patron, by the way, of another child trafficking operation that was held at the plaza. So we fast forward to Robert Maxwell becoming involved in the sale of the compromised version of Inslaw's Promise, which is the database, that software that's able to track people. Um, he goes ahead and he blackmails, not only blackmails, but he bribes John Tower, who was a senator from Texas for a very, very long time, just before he's about to retire. He pays him, I believe it was like $200,000 a year or $250,000, somewhere in that neighborhood, each year as sort of a retainer to be, quote, a consultant. But what that does is Tower turns around and says, okay, for that, I can get you into Ronald Reagan's White House. And frankly, I will open the door to any place that you want. And so that is how um, Robert Maxwell, with his handler, Rafi Eitan, from the Mossad, right, was able to access Sandia laboratories, not far from where Jeffrey Epstein had a home in New Mexico, by the way, and to sell them this modified version of Promise, which had a back door allowing the Israelis to have our nuclear secrets of the United States. Two employees, two scientists, became a little worried about Robert Maxwell. So they contacted the FBI in I think it was in San Francisco, because Robert Maxwell had a company that in fact was being sort of looked after by another daughter, Isabel Maxwell, who lived in San Francisco at the time. That was 1984. He had a front company. And the FBI began an investigation, and wouldn't you know it, they were told, we're shutting this down. And that's because J. Edgar Hoover was compromised.
Wow. I mean,
And
like,
so
yeah,
Maxwell was an untouchable. Yeah.
your knowledge is stunning. That the recall abilities that you've got on this story, that like the depth of knowledge is absolutely amazing, I have to say. Like, there's one thing to write it all down, but
Thank
to be
you.
able to recall it is even more impressive. The
Yeah.
thing that really I don't know, it gets under my skin a little bit. I mean, aside from some of the horrific acts that you write about
Yeah.
in the book, and that people have gone through, is that the implication of a lot of what you're writing is saying that the US government to some level is just completely compromised by Mossad or whoever is, or whoever was in charge of or set loose Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and just the entire operation surrounding them. Like, how compromised do you think the US and well, not just America, but like the Western governments are by this ring?
I happen to believe that it goes back for many, many years. I think I can pinpoint, and I know that I do so in some of my books, John F. Kennedy, with information that I obtained firsthand. So starting from just before JFK was running for president, in walks Michelle Rickless, who's an extreme Zionist with connections to, I mean, even Joe Biden. So, both sides of the political fence have been compromised. And he walked in to the Pierre Hotel on the invitation of Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy Sr., who, if you remember, was a bootlegger. And he basically told then young Kennedy that if he wanted money, and he had on him $200,000 to give to him. So when I say give to him, what I mean is bribe, because that's what you do when you hand somebody a trove of cash, right? So he hands him a trove of cash, $200,000 worth. And at one time, Josh, this was actually in major mainstream media newspaper reports. Okay. However, I've been studying this case and some of its characters for about 20 years, so I know it intimately. So JFK accepted the money because he was pressured by his father, and so JFK did not want, and let me just backtrack. When Michelle Rickless handed him the $200,000, he basically said, and he was standing there with several men, other extreme Zionists, he basically said, well, you get this and you get more if you do what we tell you for Israel. So, all of them have been compromised, both sides of the aisle, for a very long time.
Yeah. It's really strange how all of this power seems to emanate from
Israel and their intelligence services. I was speaking to Maram Sousli, who's like a YouTuber, citizen journalist, who's been writing a lot about the Israel-Palestine conflict and about the Syrian civil war, and she brought up Mossad and the power of them to sort of, yeah, to stop the US government intervening in a way that she believes that they should, or that they would, were they not compromised in some way. When the moments when I, especially when I'm reading your book, or when I've been just looking into anything like this in the past, before I became aware of your work, has been, it's like pulling back the curtain on a world that people sort of don't even realize exists. And I guess, like, one of the things I wanted to ask was, like, what is your sort of estimation on how common these practices are, and how much, like, this sort of these sorts of operations are going on behind the scenes? Like, is this like a really isolated thing? And I mean, I guess I don't expect that to be your answer, but yeah, yeah.
Well,
Is
I'll tell
this,
you
yeah?
this, Josh. Our world is really not what it seems. The judges, for the most part, have been compromised. There was at least the name of one judge, if I recall, it's John Roberts, on Jeffrey Epstein's flight logs. There are many people who are compromised. If you recall, initially with Jeffrey Epstein's case in Palm Beach, who were the first people to be compromised? The police department, right?
Right.
So if they can compromise the police department, which we have seen by mainstream media reporting that they did, and we can see through sort of looking for this information in court documents that they actually do that on every layer. So you've got the local police department, and then you have your elected officials all the way up to the White House. So for example, let's take Bill Clinton. He's been compromised since his days in Arkansas. And at one time, he was alerted, when he was in office, of having a spy in the White House. And I include that in my book, my third edition of Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy. What did he do when the FBI said to him, "Mr. President, we have a spy"? And you know what the president did? He turned around and said, "End the investigation." Kind of similar to what the FBI did when Robert Maxwell was trying to, who succeeded in stealing, right? So Clinton ended the investigation. It went no further. In my book, I revealed the name of who was in his White House. And I mean, all the dots are like a puzzle. They fit perfectly together. Mainstream media either does not want to, because they are called the fourth estate, right? And if you go back to the hearings back in the 1950s, 1960s, when they were eavesdropping on the Black movement, on Martin Luther King, when they were sending false letters to him to make him react. Well, there was an investigation, and it was discovered at that time that, well, my God, and this is 1960s, that normal people were being spied on. Well, this has been ongoing. It's never really, I mean, we're all kind of, I mean, Edward Snowden basically told us kind of not too long ago what was going on, but this has been ongoing now for what, 40 years? More than 40 years, what, 60 years?
Yeah.
And so it's, I think what I'm trying to say is that we live in a world that looks a certain way. Our movies tell us certain things that sound outrageous, because if you hear something, let's say a song, and if you listen to a lot of our songs, they include a woman in the room basically taking off her blouse, make the children, they should participate. Well, mainstream media, music, and movies basically do the same thing to all of us. See it happen in the Jeffery Epstein case, because we should have, and I think you would agree, that we should have more of an like people should be outraged. People should be marching in the street. How could this be happening? But we don't see
Yeah.
that, right? Because it has been normalized.
Mm. Do you think it's because it's been normalized, or do you think it's because people can't stand to face the idea that some of these horrific things are actually happening on a day-to-day basis, and not just in the past, like are still ongoing?
My personal opinion, having looked at this for a very long time, is that the other thing that we are trained since we're children is to be competitive, right? We put ourselves first. It's to be better than the Joneses, right? I mean, sort of like that. So it's become a very me society, a society that is a consumer society, right? We're not told to, let's say, for example, mind our neighbor. We're not taught that those things matter. You're taught that, you should beat the other person. So I think that part of it is how we have been as a society. We're so self-absorbed, most people are, that when something happens to your neighbor or to someone you don't know, you're going to go on about your business because your life is the most important. When the reality is that it is humankind, that we are all equally important, and without a combined effort, which I hope is happening, or I hope we're turning the page. I hope that people are waking up, right? They're waking up to many things that are happening, the weather, right? The crooked politicians. What's happening with Prince Andrew is a very, I hate to call it a good thing, but it's a silver lining, because it sheds light on the evil that does exist. And I think that collectively people want to do good, right? You want to be able, especially women are born to nurture, and our men learn from, because we're the mothers, we're the sisters, we're the aunts, right? We're the wives, we're the girlfriends. I think men can learn from us once we become sort of a unified front.
That's a really beautiful message, actually. Yeah, it's amazing that you can still remain so positive, having looked into some of the darkest things that happen in our society. It's a real credit to you that you're able to remain positive and hopeful that things are now coming to light, and that people are, as you put it, waking up to the reality of what's been going on for far too long. But I think you could be right. I think we're at some sort of turning point, hopefully. Do you think that because I have seen things like this come to light before, and hit the news. There was when Jeffrey Epstein got arrested, when Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested and detained, and when Prince Andrew was first confronted about this, when he did the interview on BBC Newsnight. And I've often thought that we're at those moments that maybe we're at a turning point, and that then things have just gone back to, everyone's sort of just forgotten that these things happen. What makes you say that this is different this time? And like, that's not to say that I don't think that you're right, but I'm just curious as to what makes you think that this is like a significant moment.
I think it takes it did, just like it did not happen overnight. One moment will not change everything. I think it does take many moments. So the BBC interview, let's say Julie Brown's investigation that was, in the Miami Herald, Virginia Giuffre's unstoppable spirit.
Mm,
I think it takes a combination of events and the persistence of not just one person, but a group of people that collectively then change the course of, you're going to have to change this, because otherwise we're living in a world that's pretty ugly. And I
mm,
think that the people that are aware, such as yourself, your listeners, my followers, people who read my books, they're doing so because they want, every day somebody wants to know, what can I do?
yeah,
Well, it's not
yeah.
that difficult, right? You just you respond to this, and you amplify Virginia's voice, let's say. You if your neighbor is screaming for help, you do something. You don't ignore the pain of other people.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I guess that's something that a lot of people then ask, and a lot of people sort of think and might discuss these things, and might have been discussing say like Jeffrey Epstein and some of his horrific crimes in the past, but sort of thought, well, if these people are so powerful, what can we do against them? And I think you're right, is that you have to start by speaking and saying that this is happening, and it's not okay, and that's where the fight back begins, because when it's all in darkness and shadows, that's when they win.
Right now, what I think most people understand is that the Jeffrey Epstein story was never supposed to be heard, right? So when you
Mhm.
earlier said something that was very apropos, you used the term something that we're looking behind the curtain. That's exactly what's happening. Jeffrey Epstein, at that point, he was already on a 30-plus-year crime spree, right?
Mhm.
He had been involved
Yeah.
in other crimes. He had been involved in a pyramid scheme, and he had been involved with Leslie Wexner, connected to the CIA and Southern Transport Airlines, which was connected to Iran-Contra,
Mm.
which was, they, Epstein and Wexner, helped move from Florida to Ohio when it became known that they were transferring drugs for guns. Um, I think that we were never supposed to see it. We're seeing it. Some of us have different pieces of the puzzle. When Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, and by the way, most people do not know that one day before he was murdered, he was ready to plea. It was on Twitter. It had made
No
mainstream media.
way. I did not know
Yes.
that.
No, but nobody does. You know why? Because they scrubbed it. So he was ready to plea. He was going to get a 5 year. They were asking for 5 years. He was ready to say, and again, this is in my book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, the third edition. He was ready to reveal the names of the people who had paid, not the people that he gifted to. So, for example, we know
Mm.
that Prince Andrew was gifted someone like, then, very innocent, young, underage Virginia Giuffre, among others, by the way,
Yeah,
allegedly.
yeah.
However, and it was on social media, and I remember responding to one or two of those tweets and saying something like, oh, well, that means that those that he gifted to are not going to be named. And then he was dead the following day, but then it was scrubbed. So just, I believe, about a week or so ago, I brought this up again in a tweet, and people were like, no, that didn't happen. So you know what I did, Josh? I pulled up my screenshot of
Hmm.
and I put it up there, and people like, oh yeah, it really happened.
Oh,
But that
that
they're
that's a
rewriting
nice, yeah.
history. Yeah, they're scrubbing everything. I mean, literally, somebody told me today, you've become the biographer of our time in the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell case.
Yeah, I saw that tweet, and I think they've summed up very accurately. Like one of the things that shocked me when I first came across your work was just like the extent of your catalog of work that you like. Yeah, you're dedicating your life to making sure that people know what has gone on with these people, and like the fucked up stuff that they've been doing, and all of the people that they've been connected to, either attempting to compromise, successfully compromising, or yeah, working on behalf of. It's the body of work is incredibly extensive, and again, like a testament to your commitment to trying to out the truth, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was part of that for a very long time. You know, I was turned into someone I did not want to be, for a very wealthy man who was connected to all of these people. And I didn't know how to protect myself at the time. And even after I walked away 8 years afterwards, I still didn't know how to protect myself, or even what to wear. You know, I'd forgotten what I looked like unless I looked into a mirror. It was horrible, but slowly I began to realize that I could help others, that I had been through something horrific. And so it took a while to, and I didn't know it. And whenever I went to an attorney, I would be told, oh my goodness, your story is so different. Is there another woman who can step forward and say, well, today we know there are thousands of women like me, right? But at the time, people would look at me and say, well, we've never heard of anything like a sex slave. Like, what happened to you, and with who? A billionaire? And it was considered so over the top. But that's what I tell people. And in fact, I have a chapter in my book. It says, if it's over the top, that's how it's planned, so that when you do tell someone, oh, well, gee, a 14-year-old girl saying that she had to have sex, let's say, for example, with Bill Clinton or Prince Andrew. Well, no, that can't be true, because that doesn't happen in real life. Well, we have found out that it does happen in real life.
Yeah, we really have. I mean, I guess the moment that I realized that this story was going truly mainstream was when Netflix did their documentary series Filthy Rich, and I was like, okay, wow, this is like becoming more acceptable to talk about, because there had been people sort of mentioning it in quiet circles, and in the dark corners of the internet for a while.
Yeah.
And when Netflix released their documentary, which is a good starting point for anyone trying to understand what's going on. But I mean, it really only scratches the surface. Like your books, or at least the one I've read, really lays out a lot more details of in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, is like how she grew up, how she was shaped, and how she became the monster, basically, that she became.
Yeah, as far as I was also happy to see Filthy Rich become a documentary. While they omit the intelligence angle and they don't necessarily discuss, let's say, Leslie Wexner.
He gets a very small part.
Yeah, it's kind of like Epstein 101, because they really don't even go into Ghislaine Maxwell. But it is a good entry point. I mean, so for example, Alan Dershowitz is now suing Netflix because of that. And it's really interesting, because I'm sure you've seen The Godfather, right? And Al Pacino and all of that, and there was a consigliere and I forget who played him, but I've always seen Alan Dershowitz as the consigliere for the Mossad, because I'll give you one last story that I don't know if most people know. So when Robert Maxwell, Israel's Super Spy, was released, and that book was written by Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon, Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, Isabel, obtained a copy. Now, the copy was not available to anyone. Somehow she managed to get a copy. She read it, and she from San Francisco, she hopped on a plane. She took it to Israel. She sat down, showed it to the then prime minister and to the head of the Mossad. So what happens afterwards? Alan Dershowitz writes a scathing review, and I forget in which newspaper, but I want to say the Washington Post. I could be wrong. Scathing review for the book, so much so that the book had almost no sales in the United States, and Thomas Dillon was left scratching his head and wondering why this attorney, Alan Dershowitz, would write a review about their book. Well,
so
because isn't it weird? Well, who was one of the people who bought my book on Ghislaine? Isabel Maxwell. At that moment in time, I danced around my apartment because I'm like, bravo for me, because if they were afraid of Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon's book, they're afraid of my book, and for good reason, because I only cite the truth, and I cite all my sources, by the way.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was really impressed with, actually, was just how well sourced everything was. That I guess you've got to be ironclad in exactly what you're saying and where your information is coming from when you're talking about such powerful people and sensitive topics, or people could come at you. Now, I'm aware that I've taken up a lot of your time here. There was one more thing that I wanted to get to, was that you've mentioned that Ghislaine's crimes and sexual assault and rape is maybe not covered to the same extent as Epstein's, and in the book, actually, you're sort of quite explicitly lay out that she was just as guilty in all of everything that was going on. It's not like she was some innocent sort of side woman. Why do you think that her involvement is sort of overlooked well, not even overlooked, that's a poor way of putting it, but it's not discussed or played up in the way that it is with Jeffrey Epstein?
I think several reasons come to play. Number one, if you recall, when investigators in Palm Beach sort of got onto the Jeffrey Epstein case of minors being sexually assaulted, they weren't even talking about being trafficked at the time.
Yeah.
Local newspapers talked about Jeffrey Epstein, but they were also slandering the children. So that, again, Alan Dershowitz would go onto their MySpace pages and say something derogatory about the child. They label a child a prostitute, which is an impossible thing, label a child a drug addict. But nobody was really writing about his right-hand person, his partner in crime, allegedly, Ghislaine Maxwell. And so that continued. And I think because even today, I get very annoyed, I'm sure you do, and everybody too, that a mainstream media continues to call her a socialite. And that's because she is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who, although a fantastic thief, right, a horrific man who lied about his own wealth, who lied about who he was, just like Jeffrey Epstein later would do. He would lie about his wealth because he was never a billionaire. He would lie about who he was because honestly, he was a spy, right? Ghislaine Maxwell has been protected by the friends of Robert Maxwell, who made it into he was a mainstream media guy, even though they were tabloids. So what do you have reporting? You have the Rupert Murdoch newspapers, right? And you have all of these media connections are again, part of that system. So they're only reporting basics. So let's say if one of her attorneys files a motion, which they have done repeatedly, asking, for example, for her to be released on bail, or asking for all kinds of silly things.
It's such a
They
joke,
only,
isn't it?
oh, it's ridiculous. They only report on the superficial stuff, right? I mean, they don't necessarily delve into it and give anyone a history of what she has really done. So at this moment in time, there are only 4 victims, alleged victims, who are in the lawsuit that the United States has against her. But as I have stated before, I do not believe that lawsuit is going to proceed in a normal way. It can't. I mean, she still is part of the Jeffrey Epstein case, and I'm going to go back to how I started it. And Alexander Acosta said he belonged to intelligence back off, and that will happen with her as well.
Yeah. Well, Kirby, I wanna really thank you for your time. I have so much respect for anyone who takes the brave step of challenging and speaking out against people in positions of power, especially when their reach seemingly extends to the highest reaches, or to the highest parts of governments around the world. So much respect to you for everything you've done, and I'm sure we'll continue to do. So yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. Thank you for your work. So if people want to check out any of your books and your Twitter
Oh, they can
profile
just
and
go to
everything,
my website. Yeah.
which is
KirbySommers.com. Summers with an O, 2 M's.
perfect.
Or
I
they
will
can
put the
follow
link.
me on Twitter with the same name.
Yeah, I will put the links for all that in the description below if people want to check it out. But yes, thank you very much, Kirby. It's been
Oh,
a
this has
pleasure.
been, yeah, it's been nice chatting with you. Thank you for doing shows like this, and please keep doing them.
I will, until they sew my mouth shut.
Excellent. All right. Well, onwards and upwards for us.
Yeah.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. Don't forget our sponsor, ExpressVPN, and my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, can both be found in the links in the description below. And also, please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. It's the best way to help us grow. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Screw the hedge funds.
You can make as many rules as you want, but if there's no teeth behind them, what's the point?
Well, like Citadel is potentially just gone in a few months. It feels like financial institutions, that they are all laughing at us by buying GME. Screw the hedge funds. Like, I will lose my entire investment if it brings them down.
Why on earth, last May, could you buy the entire company for $200 million?
What's been happening on Reddit and in social media and in the marketplace has never been seen before.
I argue that nothing is off the table. There is nothing off the table when dealing with the volumes of money in something as big as the United States stock market.
The hedge funds have clearly underestimated a group of people raised on Friday night World of Warcraft raids.
Dark pools, they're another mechanism to manipulate and cheat. Mainstream journalists don't say these things for a number of reasons. One is their sources are the people that I'm talking about, and so they can't call somebody a crook.
Superstonk and the other communities that have emerged are a hive mind, the likes of which we have never seen before. It's madness and brilliance, insanity and genius all rolled into one. It's very possible that Citadel will be gone in a few months. And not just Citadel, but the entire financial system has the potential to come crashing down. These crooks continue to gamble recklessly with the world economy, and this could be the moment that they finally get their justice.